Right. Well, we'll kick off, and thanks everyone for joining us. This is the second of what we plan to be a regular monthly update from Cotton Australia webinar. It won't always be on water. The last one we had was around OH&S issues. So whatever is the topic of the day, we hope to be able to bring you a monthly update. And if you've got any particular topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars, please pop it into the chat. With today, we've got a number of issues that I'd like to go through in terms of updating around water. What I'll do is I'll just pause after each section and take questions then, and either use the hand up or you can pop them into the chat. My colleague Sophie, she'll be monitoring the chat, and if I miss a question, she'll let me know. But thank you all for joining, and that's a quick overview of what we'll cover today. So three main topics that will go into a little bit of depth on. One is the Murray-Darling Basin Plan Review. The next is the Northern New South Wales Connectivity Review, and the Sunwater SEQ Annuity versus RAB review that's going on in Queensland as we speak. This is just a very quick snapshot of where we're up to water-wise. So at the moment in the Murray-Darling Basin, storages on average are at 47%. And if we looked at the same time last year, they were 54%. Northern Basin is quite similar to last year at 58% compared to 60%, but the Southern Basin, anyone down there would be well aware of it, is well down at 42% compared to 51% this time last year. And I won't go through the current storage levels there, but they're on the screen. Now, what that means for Cotton Australia, the crop that you guys are currently picking, we think will come in at around about 4.3 million bales, maybe a little bit more. And at the moment, we're estimating next season's crop at about 2.5 million bales. Now, that's probably a fairly conservative estimate based on current water availability. It's probably got more upside than downside, but that's what we're thinking is the impact at this stage. Move on to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan Review. You're probably all well aware that the authority kicked off a formal consultation period on February 5 to look at the current basin plan with the view of making recommendations to the Federal Minister for any changes late this year or possibly early next year. Now, it is important to note that sometimes we refer to this as resulting in Basin Plan version 2. The authority is fairly keen to point out that this is a review, and one possible, probably unlikely outcome is that it recommends no changes to the Basin Plan. But it doesn't mean that there will be a whole new Basin Plan rewritten. Now, the 12-week consultation period formally finishes on May 1, and there is a link there at the bottom around getting submissions in. And we would certainly urge all irrigators to put in their own submissions. And when we put out Cotton Matters this Friday morning, it will include a link to some suggested key messages that you might like to include in a submission. We're not opting to do a templated submission form because we know that the authorities made no secret that they'll be using AI to do an initial sort of submissions. And we do also know that campaign submissions do get discounted to a degree. So we'd like your submissions to be original, but we're happy to provide key messages, and that's what we'll have out. One thing that we need to bear in mind is that this review does assume the completion of the current basin plan, and I guess key things on that is that it does assume that the government will acquire the full 450 GLs of upwater, and it does assume that the 605 downwater, the Sustainable Diversion Limit Adjustment Mechanism projects, will be assessed late this year, early next year, and if they don't deliver the full 605 adjustment, the balance will be able to be acquired. So, and at the moment, we think that balance is likely to be in the order of 300 GLs, mostly across the southern basin. So that still represents a significant risk. And one thing that we'd encourage you to include in submissions, is the call for not to acquire that water, but either extend the deadline for the 605 projects and extend the definition of what qualifies for a project, so there can be a lot more focus on projects that gain environmental outcomes rather than a focus on saying, well, by doing this project, we've saved the application of X megalitres of water, which has made the Sidland projects extremely restrictive. Or the alternative would be, don't proceed anymore with that, and the money that you were going to spend, invest that in complementary measures. Having said that, as two very key concerns, on the whole, the review is relatively positive. It's finding out of the 29 surface SDLs, 21 are definitely achieving the basin plan environmental outcomes. 3 of them may not be, the Barwon-Darling, the Lower Darling and SA Murray. And there's 6 that, there's some concern about. But when you delve into the details, it doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite, particularly for those 6, to adjust the sustainable diversion limits. There just seems to be that, an understanding that we would support that there would be better ways to manage the environmental water that's been acquired that would improve those outcomes. And to a similar extent, that would apply to the Barwon-Darling and the Lower Darling and the South Australian Murray. When it comes to groundwater, 77 of the 80 are found to be meeting the environmental outcomes, so no pressure to adjust the SDLs. But we do have some flags raised on the Lower Namoi alluvium, the Upper Namoi alluvium, and the Lower Guida alluvium. Now, with those, the discussion paper talks about, well, in the first instance, they would like to work with the New South Wales government on dealing with any hotspots that might be in those SDL groundwater areas. And that's probably a fair and reasonable approach rather than adjusting any SDLs. I don't actually have a slide on this, but one thing to bear in mind is that, so as you know, the basin plan has set sustainable diversion limits for all these areas, units. And every year the authority, and then it gets checked by the Inspector General of Compliance, does a report on the performance against sustainable diversion limits. And every year, but certainly for the surface ones, and I believe for the groundwater, the take has been less than allowed by the SDL. So we're already outperforming the requirements of the basin plan. And that's really important to remember. And in particular for these 9 SDLs where there's some doubt, there's a very strong argument that we're already outperforming. So there is no need to jump to any conclusions and do anything quickly on those. There's just an opportunity to better manage that environmental water. What is also positive is, something that we collectively as irrigation advocates have been pointing out for years, that just adding more water is unlikely to lead to any significant environmental improvement. So decreasing the SDLs, which in effect means more water to be required for the environment, is unlikely to shift the dial. There's much better things that they could be doing, and that includes investing in complementary measures. There is a call to prepare for more variable climate, and we would strongly argue that the water allocation rules already do that to a very strong degree. Obviously, the less reliable entitlements, be they unregulated water harvesting ones, floodplain harvesting, supplementary, general security, they are all ones that get less water first if the environment is drying. So we think that manages it well. and we don't think that there's any pressing case to change those rules. There will be greater recognition of First Nation rights, and to be honest, how that plays out, I don't know. But what is probably of greatest concern is this chapter around the need to improve Northern Basin connectivity. And this will link up to the next major topic in today's webinar around the New South Wales Northern Basin Connectivity Review. But it's a very strange chapter. It alludes to the work that's being done by the New South Wales government, but it doesn't make any strong connections. And we'll talk about it more when we get into the next subject. But we think the modelling that's being done by New South Wales is so flawed. It should be unusable. And one of the key flaws, in particular in regards to the basin plan, is the modelling in New South Wales has not taken into account the impact of any of the water that's been acquired under the basin plan and what that does to improve connectivity, and nor has it taken into account the reduction in take that's come about from the licensing of floodplain harvesting. So there's lots of issues there. And again, if you're in those northern basin areas, it'd be a good one to focus on in a submission. Work to continue to relax constraints in the Gwydir, Murrumbidgee and Murray, and that, if done, would help deliver environmental water and help improve those outcomes. And again, the Gwydir and was one of those, and Murrumbidgee and Murray were recognised as SDLs where there was some concern. So again, concentrating on better utilising the environmental water is a much better outcome than adjusting SDLs. Need to address barriers to fish passage, and fortunately, there's been greater recognition of something again that we've been advocating for a long time, managing invasive pest species such as carp. If we look at those key concerns, they are around those SDL units where the authority has some concern that environmental outcomes aren't being met. We don't want to see any over-addressing of climate change. And as I just touched on, the risk of the connectivity issues in the Northern Basin, and just the complete unreliability of the modelling work that the department has done to date, the New South Wales department. And as I discussed at the front, there is still considerable risk around the completion of the current basin plan, the 450 GL upwater and the 605 GL downwater. There are active either tender processes or expressions of interest going on for the 450 upwater, including an expression of interest that hopes to lead to the recovery of up to 100 GLs out of the Northern Basin. And as I say, we kind of expect a shortfall in the Sidland projects of around about 300 GLs. But if we look on the positive side, the plan recognised that basin health is improving, and there is a recognition that just adding more water isn't going to work. And there is recognition of investing in complementary measures, and all those things tie into much that advocacy groups have been pointing out for a long time. In making submission, as I say, we'll be providing a bit more detail, but if we look at the last 3 decades of water reform, which includes the basin plan, 1 in 3 litres of water that used to be available for agriculture is now available to the environment. If we look across the entire basin, 63% of all total flows are maintained for the environment, and that's improved by about 10% or thereabouts from the basin plan. There's been no major case to lower the sustainable diversion limits, which would lead to greater water acquisition. And we really do believe that government investment must switch from water acquisition to complementary measures. Spoke about the great concerns around the Northern Basin connectivity modelling, and that irrigators will not accept rules-based changes that result in a net loss of water availability or reliability. And that's really, really important because the Northern Basin Connectivity Review at the moment relies on initiating rules changes rather than making any changes if they're needed at all through the market. And I've spoken about the risks around the 450 upwater and the Sidland projects. So just pause there and take any questions around the review or next steps, anything that people might want to raise. Notice that Lou Gall's put in a couple of comments around the Guida there, particularly around the lower Guida alluvial groundwater. So again, if you're in those areas, you might want to deal with some specific detail, include that in the submission that I'm sure GVIA will be sharing. We might move on to the connectivity review. Now, the link there around making submissions, and there's also within that links to the discussion paper. There's a snapshot paper. So the discussion paper itself is not particularly long for a government paper, but there is something like a 20-page summary document, which is pretty good as well. And then if you want to get in specific detail, there's linkage to a whole lot of other documents. So there's a lot of resources there. And as I said, by the end of the week, Cotton Australia will have shared what we believe are some key points that you might like to include in your own submissions. The Northern Connectivity Review, New South Wales Northern Connectivity Review, well, that is a New South Wales government project. It has now probably been going for about 3 years at no great pace, but it does represent some significant risks to the northern basins in New South Wales. So a little bit of history, the government supposedly responding to things like the Vitesse review into the fish deaths at Menindee, where one of the potential contributing factors was put down as a lack of connectivity across the northern basin, resulting in inflows into Menindee. Now that needs to be taken in context, or should be taken in context, that if we look at the two major fish deaths, the 2019 ones, and I think they were 2022 or 23, we had the 19 ones occurring during probably the worst drought, at least in this century, impacting on the northern basin. And we had one towards the end of 22, beginning of 23, on the tail end of one of the largest floods that have gone down. So it is hard to see how the fish deaths are directly tied to inflows, but nevertheless, it was one of the reasons why the New South Wales government appointed an independent panel to come up with some recommendations. And I guess around 18 months ago, they came out with 3 very sort of high level recommendations. That during non-dry periods, they'd ensure base flow is protected across the northern basin. During dry periods, extend the Murray-Darling resumption of flow rules into the northern basin tributaries. So at the moment, there are resumption of flow rules on the Murray-Darling itself, but not in the tributaries. Although in the past, that was managed by putting in Section 324 embargoes. And of course, we had one of those embargoes that was put in during the tinderbox drought. And also establish a connectivity environmental allowance in the Guida, Namoy and Border River. So effectively create a new account in the headwater storages and have that water available to release for improved connectivity. Now, the government has then taken those recommendations, recognised that the initial modelling was certainly underdone, and have supposedly done some more modelling, both about the hydrological outcomes and about the economic impacts. I don't intend to go into detail around those, except to say that the environmental improvements are modest and the economic costs are huge, and have been really underdone by the economic modelling that's included in the reports. I've just done a really back of the envelope modelling on what it may mean, just say in the Guida Valley. If you take their hydrological work as being correct, it would reduce average diversions out of the Guida Valley, I think, by 37 GLs a year. Now, that's not 37 GLs of general security entitlement. That is 30 GLs of average diversion. So you would probably need around about 100 GLs of general security or general security equivalent water to achieve these outcomes. And if you work on a current market price of $8,000 a megalitre, just in one valley alone, you're looking at an $800 million cost. And certainly the work that's been done on the economic side hasn't come anywhere near that. So it's really, an issue. But what I will share today, just so people can get a flavour, is these potential impacts. So, and this first slide is if all three recommendations were adopted and combined, and we'd see then that there would be an 85 GL reduction in total diversions over those 5 valleys. To put that in a little bit of context, under the Murray-Darling Basin plan, the in-valley recoveries for those 5 amount to 166 GL. So in rough terms, we're talking about half as much again. And as I said, at the moment, this is being considered through rules-based changes, not through the market, which makes it even worse. And while it is likely that compensation provisions would be triggered, compensation in New South Wales under the Water Management Act has never been tested, and it is unclear as how much compensation would be paid and how it would be paid. And as I've said earlier, the current economic modelling would underestimate significantly the amount of compensation that should be paid. If we look at the impacts on individual licence classes, you can see those impacts there. Again, this is for the combination of the potential 3 rules or actions being applied. And then if we just look at the 3 main ones individually. So this base flow protection, now they did look at 2 ways of doing this, but I've only referred to one, which is the translucency rule, because it actually has the least impact. Still a significant impact, but a least impact. So if we think about what's happening, this is supposedly during non-dry times, but wanting to make sure that minimum base flows get through down the system. Now, during those low base flows, those flows are not enough to trigger supplementary access or floodplain harvesting access or unregulated access. So the only way they can really do it is by making releases out of headwater storages. And they're talking about either creating another allowance using high security water or equivalent of high security water, and saying we will put that into the headwater storage dams, and when we don't think base flows are going to be met, we will make releases out of that headwater storage dam. When they did model that, they found that was really hard to manage, and they tended to overachieved the base flow requirements when they made these releases because, for example, there may have been rainfall downstream or something else occurred. So the other rule that they modelled was putting in a translucency rule, which would basically mean that if base flows weren't being met, it would trigger the release out of the dam of a percentage of water that had flowed into that dam during the previous 24 hours. So if nothing had flown into the dam, there would be nothing released. But, let's just say if there'd been 1,000 megs come in, and I don't have detail to the specific percentages that they model, but they would have released a percentage of that to try and make these base flow targets. And because really that impact would be on increments being made into general security accounts, you're seeing a relatively high impact there. So in the border rivers, it's 8%, the Guaida 10%, the Namoy 5.2%. The Macquarie has been, to a degree, largely left out of this review, not entirely, but their argument is there that any available flows in the Macquarie should be directed to the Macquarie marshes rather than trying to get them through to the Barwon-Darling. So, this rule wouldn't apply in the Macquarie. And you see, because there is a little bit extra water getting into the Barwon-Darling, and it probably means occasionally there'd be triggering of water access because of that extra water, there is a slight improvement to their position. And if we look at what it this is what would occur if they use that other method, which they agree overcooks things. But you can see there the impact is huge, particularly in the border rivers, but they're big numbers regardless. A 52%, 24% impact, 52 GL impact on the general security entitlements there in the border rivers. Now, in part, that is because the border rivers probably would be used to put down more water because it's got a more direct conduit into the Barwon-Darling, but also the water resource in the border rivers is generally shared between Queensland and New South Wales. But because this is purely a New South Wales initiative, this would come entirely out of the New South Wales share. To be fair, I don't believe the department is favouring this one as an option to take forward to the minister. But just to highlight again, if that first method is used, the biggest impact will be on general security accounts, and as you see, a very big impact on the border rivers in particular. Much less impact on supplementary and floodplain harvesting because, generally speaking, as I said, for base flow protection, there wouldn't be triggering of any base flow events. We look at the second one. This one is all about trying to restart the river system after an extended period of dry times. And in effect, restricting access for longer. And here we see that the impacts again are pretty relatively significant there in the from about 6% down to 1% again in the Macquarie, relatively light impact. But the impact here is almost entirely on your supplementary or floodplain harvesting, because when you would have previously been able to access, you'll have that access restricted, and and that restriction would flow through down to unregulated access on the Barwon-Darling. So a mixture of impacts there. And the third one is to create a connectivity environmental water allowance in the headwater storages. And again, that's likely to impact general security by far the most, because whether it's set up as a general security account or whether it's, say, similar to the current wider environmental contingency allowance or the allowance in Burrendong Dam, it would mean putting water into that would come at the cost of general security. And I think because there would be releases and occasionally that might be enough to trigger supplementary access, you see possibly a slight gain in supplementary access, but nowhere near offsetting the impact from the releases from the dam and creation of that connectivity allowance. And sorry, I had these slides back to front, but this shows that overall impact. And again, where the impact is most felt. And again, the border rivers is looking at the worst of it, but pretty bad impacts all up. And I might just flick back to that first slide here that shows the potential overall impact. So, somewhere between for most valleys, a 9 and 8% impact. Very, very significant, particularly for the border rivers, Guaida and the Namoi. Now, where we're up to it with it, there's an opportunity to submit on this, and that has been extended to the 15th of May, and there's an email address to make any submissions there. But there is also, I suppose, conflicting advice that we're getting back from government that the New South Wales government is effectively broke and they wouldn't be able to implement this unless the Commonwealth stepped in and made this part of the basin plan. Even though the basin plan review refers to Northern Basin Connectivity, the feedback from the authority is that they've got really no appetite to fund a New South Wales reform. But when we had a briefing from the department in Narrabri Online last week, I guess the message from the bureaucrats is that they'll be putting some options forward to the water minister, and in their view, it is likely that she will do something rather than nothing. So it is a real threat, and certainly one that all the irrigating bodies are very well aware of, and feeding information in and getting additional modelling done both on the hydrological side, but also on the economic side. Might pause there and see if there's any questions. If not, we'll move on to a Queensland issue around renewals funding. So whether we're in New South Wales or in Queensland, there's an independent process to set irrigation water charges. In New South Wales, done under IPART, in Queensland, managed by the Queensland Competition Authority. And generally speaking, water charges are made up of two main components. One is operational costs, plus the cost of capital renewal, and we could really add a third one, and a return on capital. In New South Wales for quite some time now, they have been using what's called the regulated asset base approach to doing that renewal side of the equation. So effectively, how do you fund for either new dams or major upgrades or major maintenance? They basically say, for example, if this costs $10 million, the government will fund that $10 million, and we expect a return every year on that $10 million. And the pricing authority sets what's called the weighted average return on capital, or a WACC. In Queensland, at least since 2012, we've used the annuity model. And this is just a very, very simple example of how the two processes work. So under the renewals one, which is more that orange come red type line, let's just say this is a valley with a single asset, and that asset requires major upgrade work in year 10, and then nothing really for the next 20 years. So under the annuity model, if you were an irrigator in that scheme, you would pay nothing for the first 9 years. For a little technical reason, there's a bit of expenditure in year 9, then the majority of expenditure, and so you start paying a little bit, but the majority of the expenditure occurs in year 10, so that goes straight up, and your renewals, over time decline because you pay the full weighted average cost of capital return on that 10 million in year 1, or year 11, year 10, sorry. In year 11, you pay a little bit less because the asset's depreciated slightly, but you still pay that whack. Under a renewals one, back in year 0, the authority, in this case Sunwater or SEQ Water, would say, in year 10 we have to spend $10 million. We need to fund that over the next 30 years, and we will start doing it now. So you'd pay a payment in year 1 right through to year 10, and that payment over time, as the asset depreciates and the expense is paid off, that payment declines slowly. And this is what happens to your annual balances. So under the annuals renewity, you're putting money aside up to the expenditure. So you might have had, I don't know, let's just say you might have had $3 million in the bank there. You spent the $10 million, and over the next 20 years, the remaining $7 million is recovered. Where under the RAB model, you spend nothing, so nothing goes into the account to prepare for this expenditure up until year 9, year 10. You spend the money, so you have a large a balance there, and you're paying that whack, and over time that balance drops away. So that's a very simple scheme. In other schemes, you'd have later expenditure, you'd have more assets. It would all get complex. But the Queensland government wants to move to a regulated asset base model. They believe it is simpler and easier, and to a degree it is. The annuity one, to work properly, does involve reasonably accurate forecasts 30 years out on a rolling basis on what you need to spend. So RAB one, you spend the money and you know what you've spent. So it's administratively easier. But we were able to, through Queensland Farmers Federation, or with Queensland Farmers Federation, they were able to gain some funding from the government to hire an independent consultant. And we had money to look at 6 schemes, 4 of them Sunwater schemes, 2 of them SEQ Water schemes. And we found in the longer term, so by year 2062, the payments under a RAB system would have been between 2 times to 5.8 times greater than under the renewals annuity. And that's largely because the RAB system allows and certainly facilitates the government getting a rate of return on their investment. And in Queensland, it's generally been accepted that it operates for rural water on lower bound costs, which would cover the cost of operating and capital refurbishment, but no extra return on that capital. The RAB certainly provides an avenue for that return, and that leads to that change. But I did also find that, to be honest, a RAB would provide us with a cheaper prices in the short to medium term. Now, when we did the modelling, we deliberately wanted to get a number of years of actual expenditure rather than forecast expenditure. So we started in 2012 and then worked through to 2062. That showed that, and this is one scheme as an example, the Eaton Bulk scheme, that crossover point when it became cheaper to have a stay with the renewals annuity was around about 2027. Now, in reality, if we started now, that crossover point is probably more, in the 20 somewhere between 2035 and 2040. But the principle still shows that this ever widening gap between the two systems. So submissions on that process closed earlier this week. The Queensland Competition Authority will put out a draft report, I think, in May, and we'll respond then as to whether or not they accept that there is a strong case for, in the long term, to stick to the renewals annuity. But that's certainly been the position of Cotton Australia in our submissions, and also QFF and other members of QFF. So happy to take any questions. Well, good. I see a question there that went into the chat from Grace. No, there was really no clear indication from the department as to what options they'd be putting forward, except I think they were leaning to the translucency rule for that first one because it did have a lesser impact. What they did say, particularly applied to the resumption of flow one, that there was probably room to have genuine discussions with irrigators as to whether there was a way, probably around timing, that might allow that to occur without any net impact. And that's something that we do need to explore further. There's no more questions. I just wanted to, I suppose, highlight, a number of other things that Cotton Australia, in conjunction with the peak bodies, are working on. There's a couple of current New South Wales specific ones. In southern New South Wales, there's a requirement, as has been in northern New South Wales, for the creation of floodplain management plans. Now, we're looking at an area that was historically developed largely, well, in part, prior to the First World War and then post Second World War, and there is a lot of historical infrastructure there, and the development of these plans just seem very, very bureaucratic. Irrigators have to be put in their own applications. We're trying to work a way as to how that can be done in an easy way, possibly with recognition of infrastructure that was in place before certain dates, and certainly need to give credit to New South Wales Irrigators Council and the Murrumbidgee based irrigator groups at Murray that have been taking the lead on that. Similarly, across New South Wales, there's been changes in the way that groundwater trades have been managed and approved by Water New South Wales. It appears that they're now following rules more closely that were been in place for a long time, making it relatively difficult for irrigators to know how much water that they might be able to transfer in on a bore if it's above 50% of their entitlement. And it becomes particularly tricky where, since we had the major groundwater reform in 2007, a number of people either lost allocation, sold off allocation, did different things, and now have less allocation than they previously may have had, but are trying to compensate by being able to trade that water in. I would say that'll be a slow process. The IPART, I've just spoken about the QCA process in Queensland. IPART, has just put out its draft prices for the next couple of years. Certainly people need to take a look at that in their individual valleys. We're looking in general at about a 10% plus inflation increase on water prices. So that's coming your way, unfortunately. in Queensland, and it was done earlier in New South Wales, but they've been doing regional water assessments, and some of them have been linked with their reviews of their water resource plan. So currently the Central Queensland and the Gulf Water Plan are coming to the end of their process, and we've been watching and inputting on that. We're hopeful that there may be some more water made available in the Gulf, and we think that we've been able to protect the access to the strategic infrastructure reserve water that's played a pivotal role in growing the cotton industry in the Dawson Valley. A very current but local issue for the Darling Downs growers is the regional planning interest and condamine alluvium and other legislation bill.
Platform turns your vision into a unique logo. Start by going to Logo Maker.
This look, sounds like AI at work. This bill runs the risk of significantly reducing landholder rights if they are engaging with CSG companies who may wish to place infrastructure on their land. The government believes the bill is an improvement. We take a different view on that, a very strongly different view. Submissions closed on that yesterday. We're hoping to have an opportunity to present to the committee that's looking into it next week. It's also been calls by the New South Wales Independent member for Murray, Helen Dalton. She was able to get up a motion in the New South Wales Parliament calling on the New South Wales government to call on the federal government for a Royal Commission into the Basin Plan. There's no detail around any proposed terms of reference, and we and other irrigator groups are very cautious about joining the call for that without clear knowledge of what the terms of reference will be. We certainly have the history of the South Australian Royal Commission that certainly didn't do the irrigation industry any favours. So we'll be looking for some guidance on what those terms of reference are before we join in any support for that Royal Commission, as there's certainly lots of downside risk. Running parallel, well, yes, in timing, parallel with the review of the Basin Plan, the authority is also doing a review into the management of Menindee Lakes. And this review has been authorised by all the jurisdictions, so the 4 basin states and the Commonwealth, which I believe is probably the first time in a long time that this total review has been occurring. Unfortunately, the submissions on that also close on May 1. I think fundamentally, all those involved with the lakes need to make a clear decision as to whether the lakes are primarily being run as a water storage and an inefficient water storage that will always be inefficient but could be improved, or primarily being run as a environmental asset, or a combination of the two, where there's active efforts to store as much water as possible in the higher lakes and the deeper lakes, and improve the environmental management of those lakes, particularly by installing proper fishways and the like that will hopefully prevent fish deaths. So that's something that also we need to get a submission in. From a Northern Basin perspective, I think one thing that's important about it is, at the moment, there's a number of rules, and probably more rules coming, that set the management of water based on the amount of water that's in Menindee Lakes. I think we should be collectively arguing that any such trigger should be based on the amount of water that's been allowed to flow into Menindee Lakes rather than the amount of water in Menindee Lakes, because the northern industry, northern rules, has no control about how the water in the Menindee Lakes are used. So those people in control of the lakes might decide to use the water quicker, which mean our triggers would apply more often. So I think that's something that if you are putting in submissions, if you could bear that in mind, it would be worthwhile. There is also a statutory review into national water reform. So In 2004, the National Water Initiative kicked off. It has regular reviews. This review, in part, is focusing on environmental water management and also meeting water needs of towns and other critical human infrastructure. There is also a review into the review of the Federal Water Act, and that will run almost concurrently with the Basin Plan review. And depending on the recommendations of the Basin Plan, may lead to some changes of the Water Act. And I touched on the National Water Initiative a moment ago. That the government wants to change that. Federal government wants to update that, and they have drafted and signed a new National Water Agreement, which is sitting with the states. And at the moment, the states have not rushed to sign that. At the moment, the federal government has not put any money on the table to encourage the states to sign it. And while there is probably not too much in it that is of critical concern, it would require the states to do a whole lot of action plans. And the states are so far behind, particularly New South Wales, in dealing with some of the things that need to be dealt with. In my view, there's absolutely no justification for signing this and taking on more work. So I might again pause, and if there's any questions on any of those issues. And just finally, this only came through yesterday, and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority has announced that they're setting up their own leadership program. It's going to be run by the highly respected Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. They're looking for 24 participants across the basin. There'll be 2 in-person sessions and some online learning. I don't have a lot of detail, but I gather they're going to mix it up into 3 groups. So I assume it's 3 groups of 8 rather than 3 groups of 24. Over the years, Cotton Australia with CRDC, we have supported a number of people to do the Peter Cullen Trust Leadership Program. Now, I believe that's a good leadership program. But I also believe it's absolutely critical that we have irrigators that are part of these leadership cohorts, because the risk is that they get filled with bureaucrats and people from government or other semi-government or non-government organisations. And there's a whole lot of groupthink that goes on. And it's just really critical that there's someone there that's got hands-on understanding of what happens in irrigator land and what the impacts of some of these things are to participate in these programs. So really encourage people to have a look at this one. It doesn't look like it is a huge time commitment. If you jump on that link there, you can register your interest and get more information. But would really like to encourage people that have an ongoing interest in water to look at either doing this program or the Peter Cullen Trust program. That leads me to the end. Happy to take any questions or comments. I hope you found today useful. And just a reminder that if you've got any topics, and so they don't have to be about water, they can be around anything, please drop them in the chat or shoot me an email, as we are trying to make this a regular feature or once a month update. So be really keen for people to put any suggestions through. This webinar will be available, probably a link into tomorrow's Cotton Matters available online. So thank you very, very much for attending.
Thanks, mate. Much
Thank you very
appreciated.
much, Michael.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks very much, Michael. Cheers.
Well done, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael.